Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome on this very cold, frosty evening. It's wonderful to see so many people here in the Edmund Burke Lecture Theatre. And also, those of you who are joining us online, might be a wise choice tonight, a bit cosier, but it's lovely that you're all here. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all. Tonight, we reconvene for the first of our talks as part of our series, What Does It Mean to Be Human in the 21st Century? Along with our partners at the DOC, the Human Insights Lab and colleagues from Accenture and Accenture's Global Research, well, the DOC is their Global Research Innovation Hub. If you're from Accenture, give out a roar. Oh, that's lovely. So you're all mixed up in. I cannot tell you how thrilled we are to be working with you all. It's absolutely wonderful. And we've already had a whole series of fabulous engagements with colleagues from the DOC and the Human Insights Lab. So, and we obviously kicked off this series with the Behind the Headlines back in December. So we're so thrilled tonight to be joined by Professor Luke ONeill, and I'll say a few words about Luke in a moment, though the truth is Luke doesn't need an introduction, but I will in a moment, Luke. I do, though, want to just very quickly introduce myself and say a few words about the Trinity Longroom Hub. So my name is Jane Olmeyer, and I'm the director of the Trinity Longroom Hub, which is this lovely building, just actually literally on top of this lecture theatre. It's our research institute in the arts and humanities, and in the hub we do three things. So the first thing we do is celebrate the excellence of the arts and humanities at Trinity. The second thing we do is promote conversations across disciplines and multi and interdisciplinarity. And tonight is a wonderful example of exactly that. And I'm sure Luke would agree, but we're very lucky here in Trinity to have these phenomenal relationships with our colleagues across the disciplines. Over the years, we've become great friends. We really relish opportunities to collaborate and work together and to share. So this is a great example of this tonight. The third thing we do in the hub is public humanities. We believe passionately that we need to take the learnings from the arts and humanities and more generally to the widest public audiences. So that's the hub. This lecture series is one of our signature events, What It Means to Be Human in the 21st Century. It's a cross-disciplinary lecture series, and we've got a whole raft of just fantastic speakers who are going to be joining us over the course of 2019, including some of our own stars, starting with Luke tonight, but over the course of the spring, you'll get to meet a few of our other amazing stars, including Ian Robertson now will be on in February. We couldn't do this without Accenture, and we are so grateful to Accenture for being our partners on this series. As I say, it just wouldn't be happening without you guys. I suppose the aim of this series, just very broadly, is to understand that the human experience is very different depending on the lens through which we view it. So over the course of these lectures, we always want to shift that angle and look at the human experience through very, very different lenses. Because the one thing we do know, looking at it from the perspective of the humanities, is where it gets really magical is when the disciplines start to collide. And I think we're going to get a really strong flavour of that tonight from Luke. We also love to ask disruptive questions, to be the awkward ones who are challenging. And again, we feel that that really happens when disciplines collide, but also in this instance where academia is coming together with industry. It creates a very, I think, very important environment that allows us to shape and influence in a way that we can't normally do that. So I'm going to turn now to Luke. As I say, he needs very little introduction from me, but he holds the chair of biochemistry here at Trinity, and he leads the inflammation research group. His research has a particular focus on innate immunity, and in 2018 he was named by Claravatis, is that how you pronounce it? Claravatis, as one of the world's most influential scientists, being in the top top 1% in immunology. The top 1% in immunology, that's as good as it gets. And obviously we're hugely proud of Luke and the achievement, not just of him, but his team. He's been the co-founder of 3 spin-out companies where they're developing new treatments for inflammatory diseases. He's won a whole raft of awards, and I won't list them all here, aside from the Royal Dublin Society Boyle Medal for Scientific Excellence. And I'm a 17th century historian, so I have to mention Robert Boyle. Any excuse to bring the 17th century to a conversation. But he also was elected the Royal Irish Academy. He received the Royal Irish Academy Gold Medal for Life Sciences. Again, a huge accolade, and was elected to the Royal Society back in 2016. Again, it's as good as it gets. But it gets even better as far as I'm concerned, because in addition to publishing all these scientific papers, Luke is a historian too. And I say this because I'm sure everybody's seen his book, yes? Humanology. So as a historian, I'm seriously jealous. I'll tell you why. Because this has probably sold more copies than many a professional historian's book would sell. It's been a huge success. And I believe a few copies are available tonight. It's sold out. It's being reprinted. But if you haven't read it, I would strongly encourage you to do so, because it really is a fabulous synthesis. And of course, Luke is well known to many of us in terms of very regular commentator on News Talk and other radio channels and media. So tonight, I would ask you all to put your phones on silent. However, for those of you who tweet, if you could use the hashtag HubMatters and the hashtag being human. We're also live streaming our discussion and the lecture this evening, and we'll be podcasting it as well. So those of you who want to listen again to Luke's talk, just go to the Trinity Long Room Hub website and click on Listen and Watch. So after the lecture, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. But now, if I could invite you all to join me in welcoming Luke ONeill.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much, Jane, for those kind words. I'm very happy to come and take part in this. It's a wonderful thing to be a scientist and talk to Jane, you see, a world expert in history as well. And my book's outselling hers. Not that we're competitive, but we love that bit as well. But it probably isn't, yeah, but it's no small thing to say what a great thing this is, this lecture series. I'm very happy to give one of these lectures. I am a scientist. But it is all about being human, and remember, the ultimate goal of a university is to answer this question. It doesn't mean, that you go to university to get a job. Forget that nonsense, Or forget the economic bit of, I hate all that, Universities are really about education, drawing people out, and getting them to talk to people like me and Jane, and hopefully make something of their lives and let them to lead as full a life as possible, and that's what it's all about. So I'm very happy to come here and give one of these lectures. Now, I'm also here to plug the book, of course. I wouldn't come otherwise. And as Jane has said, I'll give you the story of the book in a minute, actually, but it's a strange business when you write a book like that and it sells. Like, you think, I might sell a couple of hundred copies, but it sold 8,000 copies of the hardback, which is incredible. Mainly my family and extended relations have bought it. But it's a real thrill to see it being bought by people, and people are reading it. It's a real thrill for me for that. So, and I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. It's a freezing cold night out there. You could have stayed at home, so thanks for coming. Big thanks to Jane for the invitation, and Accenture, mention them again. They helped us with the Schrodinger conference hugely, so I want to thank them for that too. Now, let's get into the meat of this topic, though. What is it to be human? Now, have you ever heard a more egocentric question in your life? It's horrendous. We're so up our own wazoos, us humans. And let me tell you, we are the least of species on Earth. Now, why do I say that? Well, there was a paper in a big eminent journal last summer called the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the USA. We make up 0.01% of life on Earth as a species, 0.01%. Okay? Even worse, we've made 83% of animals extinct in our time, and 50% of plants. Isn't that horrendous? And we think we're so great, don't we? It's ridiculous. Secondly, you might ask the question, and I'm sure you all wonder, what is the purpose of life? Do you ever think that? when you were younger you did a lot. I've stopped thinking that now because it doesn't get you anywhere. But if you're a scientist, the only purpose of life, if you're a scientist, is to copy DNA. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the first cell arose, as I'll explain in a minute, 4.2 billion years ago, the first life on Earth. And that creature, a single-celled organism, had DNA. That's what its genes were made of. And it copied the DNA. And then there were two cells, and then there were, proliferation. Then we get many, many different cells. Eventually, evolution begins to happen, of course, and we end up today with all this DNA. The Earth is awash with DNA. It's a biological thing that began 4.2 billion years ago. The only purpose then is to make DNA. If that first cell had said to every subsequent cell, go forth and multiply, we're hopeless, 0.01%. We're not fulfilling the mission of life at all, are we? Half the DNA on Earth is in plants, for instance. So we're not really doing this sort of thing that we're supposed to do. So again, we're far too egocentric in many ways to consider this. And then I put a couple of slides together. Every time a scientist does something, and Jane will remember this from the history of science, it makes us less important as a species. We thought the sun went round us. That was nonsense. There's Copernicus, That's the situation. And now we wonder, is there any life outside Earth? Did you know there are 40 billion planets now, called exoplanets, in the Goldilocks zone around their stars, which means life could be on those planets. There's bound to be life somewhere else in the universe. It's not unique to Earth. We all feel there must be life elsewhere. And two pictures I just put together this afternoon for you. This is the most iconic picture ever, probably. It's the 50th anniversary. It was taken in 1968 in the Apollo 8 mission. It's called Earthrise, Isn't it marvelous? And that was taken, and that became a really iconic image. And again, the astronauts said, oh, for heaven's sake, there's the Earth way down there, And Neil Armstrong said that when he was walking on the moon, he put his thumb up, and his thumbnail blocked out the Earth completely. And he said it didn't make him feel big, it made him feel very, very small. Incredible, all life is on that planet. And then it gets even worse. Now, I'm going to crack a joke in a minute, in case you're wondering. Look at this image. This was taken by the Voyager spaceship. It was taken about 20 years ago. Voyager has left our solar system and has looked back. And that is the Earth, that little white dot, from 6 billion kilometers away. Isn't that incredible? This makes you wonder, what's it all about? There's no doubt we're a speck on a speck on a speck on a speck on a speck. Life has no meaning, remember that, okay? How do we deal with this? Thankfully, we have our friends in the humanities to help us. That's their purpose, is to give our life meaning. And we turn to the great man himself, Waiting for Godot, the best play ever written. What does Sam Beckett say? You're on Earth, there's no cure for that. That's in Waiting for Godot. So let's get on with it now. Let's get on with this question of what is it to be human. And of course, we love Sam, one of our alumni. He's getting an honorary degree. He only took one honorary degree in any university, in Trinity. He took the one university he took a degree from, which is quite a good thing to say. Now, let's get on with the book plug. You ready? So I think Jane asked me because of the book, and the book actually addresses the question, what is the basis for being a human being? From a scientific point of view, it's through the lens, and that was the word Jane used, of science. This amazing existence. Can we get a scientific view of it? And the book has an interesting history. I'll give you how it happened. I've written loads of science stuff, like about 393 publications, which very few people read, sadly. But this book, I thought, I was asked by Gill, and they said, would I do a book for the popular audience? I said, no, I didn't want to. I was reluctant initially. And then they convinced me. They said, you're going to make money, I'll do it. And then they said, oh, come on, Pat Kenny, the radio stuff, people like it, just do a book. And then they said, whatever you want to write about. And I didn't really have any inspiration initially. What would I write about? Looked over my notes from Kenny. It was easy to write, because all my notes were in my office from that slot I do at Pat. And I realised, and I spoke to a postdoc in my lab at the time called Annie Curtis, and over coffee she said to me, Luke, it's obvious. Start with the origin of life, right? And then do us as humans evolving, and then what makes us human, and then our extinction. That'll be the narrative. And I told them, yes, let's go for it. So I put the proposal in, and Gill said, yeah, let's do it. Then I began to write it. I'd never written popular science before. And Sarah Liddy, who was my key person, the editor in Gill, said, give me a few pages and I'll make sure you're any good, right? And it's a bit like when you're in school and you wrote the essay, remember? And the soundtrack of Glen Rowe comes on and you write the essay, and I gave it to her. And a week later, I met her in the science gallery, actually, expecting her to rip it apart, like a school teacher. No, I like it. Keep writing, she said. And I kept writing. A bit of encouragement was good, you know. And then finally, the book is produced. And I was amazed at the work they did. I thought it'd be a little tiny paperback, you know. They got an artist involved, great images. It was such a thrill to see this book in front of me, you know. And I was so happy with Gil. And I want to thank them, I guess, for putting together such a wonderful book. And then the book is published, and then, as I'm saying, off we go. Now, the book is about the origin of life up to our extinction and everything in between, very ambitious, you know. And one way to convey what's in the book and to address the question, what is it to be human, is this. And I've shown this before. This is a great painting by Paul Gauguin. It's called Where Do We Come From, What Are We, and Where Are We Going? That's the title of that painting, right? And that's what the book is about. And I show this on purpose because, remember, that's an artist's answer to those questions. A scientist might have a different set of answers, but it's the same thing. There is no difference between the arts and the sciences, in my opinion. It's all about knowledge and trying to understand existence using different ways of getting at this, you know. And the artist, when he writes a poem, or she might do a painting or whatever, is the same as me in my lab trying to answer what's the immune system. It's trying to get some kind of understanding on a very complex thing. And I really believe there's no difference. And in fact, creativity is very important in science. To think of an experiment to do in a lab is no different thinking up about, you know, stream of consciousness technique in a book or whatever. Artists have to be innovative, so do scientists. Where do ideas come from? It's very similar, you know. And so I always use this as an example of one attempt to answer these questions. Now, we're going to go through the questions one by one. Are you ready? It's going to be a roller coaster ride about all of existence. Where do we come from? Let's begin with that. Now, of course, there's all these creation myths that humans have often puzzled about this. And the opening sentence in the book immediately disenfranchised half the audience when I said, some people think it's all about two hippies and a talking snake. That's Adam and Eve, you see. The Aboriginals think a rainbow serpent, it's a great myth that shook the cosmos into life. This may be true, remember. If you show me the snake, I'll believe you, right? Because if you're a scientist, you just look for evidence for things, right? And this, who knows, there could be a rainbow serpent. But our mantra tonight and in the book is from the Royal Society. As Jane mentioned, I became a fellow 2 years ago. Robert Boyle was a founder of the Royal Society, by the way, an Irish guy founded it. The motto in 1660 was nullius in verba. That was the motto. It means take nobody's word. That's the motto of the Royal Society. And that captures science beautifully. Science is all about show me the data or shut up, right? And if I go to a scientific conference and I give a talk, if I haven't got data to back it up, forget it, you know. So show me the evidence. Take nobody's word is what science is all about. And that's what we're going to use that now tonight. We're going to take nobody's word. What I'm going to tell you is backed by science. There's data there. And I was drawn to science. I loved literature in school. English was my best subject in school, strangely enough, not science, and I loved literature, but I realised in sixth year I can't be bothered writing another analysis of Keats or whatever, you know. I was drawn to science because of data. You can do an experiment and then you can see things, and that was quite attractive to me in terms of my future career. But there's our motto, take nobody's word. Now, what's the answer to the question, where do we come from? Well, it's very simple now, and all science agrees. Life began on Earth around about 4 billion years ago. It's a long time ago. And some of the evidence for this is here. Experiments were done to address this question. And remember, scientists want to do experiments. This guy's name is Stanley Miller. In 1953, he sets up an experiment when he recreates the early conditions of the Earth 4 billion years ago. We know from fossils what the Earth was like. And he makes this sort of strange apparatus. This is in the book. The artist did a great job on this. So you can see here in this little vessel with the electrode, there's ammonia, methane and hydrogen. Those gases were in the atmosphere 4 billion years ago. There was lightning strikes, so he's electrode, and there was heat, probably from hydrothermal vents. And he sets this up, and it bubbles away, and it recirculates very cleverly, keeps condensing. He let that run for a week, that apparatus, in his lab in 1953. Came in a week later, and guess what had happened? A tiny creature was... No, that's a joke. What he finds there is amino acids. Now, amino acids, as any biologist here will know, are the building blocks of proteins. Just in the course of a week, with very simple chemicals, you can make amino acids. That's the building blocks of life. This has got better and better, this experiment. It was published in 1953. There's the paper with the apparatus. The same year as a more famous paper, the double helix. We don't mention this anymore. Dr. Watson has made a show of himself yet again. But That paper came out the same year as this, and yet this is probably more important. That this is important is the information of life is in DNA, but the biochemistry was in the Miller paper. And this experiment, 2 years ago, they did even better. They set up in a test tube hydrogen cyanide, hydrogen sulfide, two gases that again were in the early atmosphere, and UV irradiation in a test tube. And they made amino acids, nucleotides, the building blocks for DNA, and fats, lipids. These are the three basic building blocks of life. Can be made in a week in a test tube. That means life evolved through random chemistry, and the first cell that we're all descended from arises about 4.2 is the latest date on this in Canadian rocks is when this happened. No doubt life is just a chemical reaction. It's very complicated, but life now starts on Earth. And now evolution kicks in, you know, and we get all these great species. There's a bacteria from 3.5 billion years ago that we have, you know. So again, we've got some fossils of these. Imagine that distance of time, you know, it's incredible. Evolution plays out, and all that happens next is an awful lot of evolution, and the essence of it is these cells that arise can divide. I mean, there's an onion, there's some onion cells. They've got a great trick, they can copy themselves. That's all life is. Very complex bag of tricks makes a copy of itself, and then life then begins to change and evolve and so on, and we get this kind of timeline. You know, eventually we get eukaryotes, which are multi-celled organisms. Finally, egocentrically we get to us. We're just here because of evolution, remember, of living systems. Now, the big question then becomes, would we find life on other planets? And as I've said already, big chance we will. It's just chemistry. There's 40 billion test tubes up there, remember, bubbling away, bound to have life outside this system. They found evidence on Enceladus, this moon going around Saturn about a year ago, and NASA found evidence of a thing called free hydrogen. That's what drives energy in living systems. That's been found on a moon going around, you know, Saturn. So we will find life is the view, because it's just chemistry. It may not be like us, but it will exist. Now, so eventually you get to us. Now, if that time frame was 24 hours from the first cell to us, right, we arrive at 3 seconds to midnight. That's how recent we are. Homo sapiens, the question we're addressing tonight, arises 3 seconds to midnight in Africa. No doubt about this at all. 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerges through evolution, okay? And now we're there. Our species is now here. And then we move. 100,000 years ago, we're in the Middle East. We move over there. 70,000 years ago, we go to Asia. 50,000 years ago, roughly, we're in Australia. That's the Aborigines now. Eventually, 15,000 years ago, the biggest mistake ever, we invent Americans because we go to America. And there's evidence of that. And then, interestingly, 40,000 years ago, we go to Europe, right? And guess how many years ago, Ireland? 10,000 years ago, we eventually end up in this godforsaken freezing. What made people stay here? You know? 10,000 years ago, we're in Ireland, and that's the history of humanity based on DNA. We're using DNA as a great tool here in many ways. So in many ways, 100,000 years ago, our relations, if you like, who got like 6 A1s in the leaving, they go off to Asia and they go to Australia. 60,000 years later, after a few repeats, we go into Europe. And now we're in Europe, and that's the history of our species. And amazingly, when we go into Europe and we go into Asia, we meet two other species of hominids, a bit like us, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. The big question was, did we interbreed with them? Now, it was always felt to be unlikely, because the Neanderthals were like hairy brutes type thing, you know. And yet, we invent a machine to go back in time. That machine is a DNA sequencer. We sequence Neanderthal DNA, and lo and behold, we find we carry some of their genes. That means our ancestors had sex with the caveman and got some of those genes off the Neanderthal. Around about 2% of your genes are Neanderthal genes. Okay, so we had sex and we inherit these genes. The genes are very interesting, and I'm an immunologist. Our immune system is partly built from caveman's genes, because these people live in a very robust environment and they must have a great, strong immune system. We got some immune system. Addiction genes, nicotine addiction, amazing. There's a gene links into nicotine, was from Neanderthals. They must have been addicted to some kind of food stuff, we think. So we inherit some of the genes we have from Neanderthals. And the Denisovans as well, we get evidence that we interbred with them too. And now we've got us on Earth carrying this ancestral DNA. That's what makes us, I suppose, a species, you know, with specific traits, was the interbreeding with these two different groups of people. And it's very important to remember that. And then, of course, what happens next is, even though we went to Europe 40,000 years ago, we eventually invent machines to go and visit the relatives, you see. And when Columbus goes to America, it's a family reunited after 70,000 years. Remember, the bright kid went off to America, you know, as usual. We invited a machine to go and visit them. That's what happened. Same with Australia. We go there in 1776. We meet our relatives that had left us, tens of thousands, same species, you know. And now we're all together, hopefully as one big happy family. The trouble is, what do? We kill them, don't we? You know, it ends badly for the native people of America and Australia, you know. And yet America might now be seen as the melting pot where it's all kind of come together again. That's where we came from, okay? 4.2 billion years ago, humans, and then travel, I guess, and you get to our species. Now, second question then, what are we? Now, of course, this can be answered in many different ways, and I'm going to go through 7 of them for you. The rest of the book takes us through these various things that define us as a species, okay? And I'm going to talk about attraction and love, that always gets attention, you know, raising children, gender, music, humour, religion, and ageing. Let's go through them now. It's going to be a bit intense, get ready. But these are my favourite topics out of the book. And let's begin with attraction. Now, amazingly, this chapter has got the most interest, surprisingly. All the interviews I did to plug the book before Christmas, this is the only chapter they wanted to talk about, you know, which is intriguing, isn't it? And we all want to know, don't we, what makes us human is we get it on, to quote Marvin Gaye. And what makes us attracted to someone, it's a mystery. The ancients invented Cupid as a way to explain this mystery. You see someone across a crowded room and all that. It's a fascinating biological question. And back in November, I was plugging the book on the 6 o'clock show on Virgin Media 1. And the presenter said, so what is the basis for attraction? And I said to her, Merlin, are you ovulating? And she said, pardon? It's a scientific... I've never been asked that before, she said. And I said, because if you are, you're exuding a pheromone towards me to draw me in, you see, because you want your eggs fertilized, right? Now, this is scientifically proven. Deirdre O'Kane, the comedian, ever heard her? She was sitting beside me on the couch. She starts laughing. That was a great question. Later in the show, Kevin Dundon, the celebrity chef, is there, and we're all standing around him, and he's making a lovely cake, and he's pouring a very sort of lascivious butterscotch sauce over the cake. And Deirdre goes, Jesus, I've started ovulating, she said. So that was quite good. But the truth is, we're a bunch of hormones, and the evidence for this is so compelling. When you meet someone, you're smelling them, first of all. Lots of stuff on that in the book as well. Desire is testosterone, and women have testosterone as well, remember, slightly less than men, but desire is based on those 2 hormones. And then we fall in love, and it's dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and NGF. They're the 4 chemicals of love, right? And for about 6 months on average, you're obsessed with that person. And in fact, when someone's in love, and you show them a photograph of the person they're absolutely in love with, right, in an MRI machine, I'm sure Ian Robertson will talk about this in his talk, the bit of the brain that lights up is the same as if you've taken heroin. So this is true. Heroin is mimicking the thrill of being in love. It's piggybacking on a biological system. Now, that lasts about 6 months, and anybody who's married will know that. If it went beyond that, we'd all be dead because you spend your whole time staring at the other person, and you'd be eaten by the saber-toothed tiger would eat you. So that phase has to end, that massive phase of, you know, that intense, obsessive love. And of course, when you're addicted, you go past their house, you check their Facebook page, you're a pain in the ass, aren't you? You know, that's the addiction phase of love. After 6 months, if you're lucky, many don't make it that far, attachment kicks in, and that's deep love, and that's oxytocin is the key hormone there. Now, oxytocin is a fascinating hormone. It's made in humans in 2 situations. When you're in love, and it doesn't have to be man and woman, it can be a child with their parent or anything, just bonding hormone, right? Secondly, when a mother is breastfeeding her baby, they get massive oxytocin rushes, both the baby and the mother, and it bonds them together, right? That's what oxytocin, lovely idea that this bonding hormone is there. Now, much of the research behind this was funded by perfume companies, inevitably. They're trying to mimic these things in a perfume, you see. And they tried oxytocin, they sprayed it on men. They sprayed oxytocin on a man to see if it would make him more attractive to a woman or whatever. All that happened was he got a massive thirst for milk. No, that's a joke in the book. Okay, so anyway, oxytocin is the bonding hormone. And this is a bit sobering, isn't it, Jane? What is it to be human? We all think love is, oh, great. It's bunch of chemicals and hormones, remember? Now, it does go beyond this, as you'll read. Kindness is evaluated. A big question has been, and this is a good one, what you're attracted to. There is someone for everyone. We've all got little differences among us, but there are universal rules of attraction. A man will find a woman who has a 7 to 10 waist-hip ratio. Subconsciously, he'll be attracted to that. A woman goes for a man with 10 shoulder, 9 waist, and that's going into your brain, and it's subconscious. You're drawn to those proportions. That's the way it is. And we love symmetry. If you look at a photograph of a man or woman and say they're beautiful, it's symmetrical, and there's the famous Vitruvian man. And there, this is Michelle Pfeiffer. Symmetry defines beauty. It's true, because symmetry means good genes. It means you're built properly. You're not kind of, deformed, and symmetry is really beautiful. And we're all drawn to these things. Every culture will have those rules. And then the other part of that chapter is you meet someone, and then you go through this phase of love, and then eventually you attach. What about infidelity? Now, people ask this the whole time as well. It turns out humans are classified as mildly polygamous. Isn't that right? We're not fully polygamous, we're mildly polygamous. And they found the basis for this as well, scientific basis for why, we're monogamous or polygamous. And the model organism is the vole. And anybody has done biology in my lectures, that was an example. This animal is a fascination. There's two types of vole, the prairie vole and the meadow vole. The meadow vole is polygamous, and the prairie vole is a monogamous, and that's really interesting. Why is that difference? It's a single gene difference between these two voles. It's called the vasopressin receptor alpha. The monogamous vole has more of it in their brains, and it makes them monogamous. Isn't that incredible? They've proven this scientifically. So a single gene determines faithfulness. Now, lately, this has been questioned, and the vole might be a love rat, was the line they used. Maybe they cheat a bit. But the best part of this whole study was, guess what represses this gene? Remember, the more of this you have, the more faithful you are. Alcohol represses it. So if you're caught cheating and you go home to your boyfriend, it wasn't me, it was the vasopressin receptor alcohol axis that made me do it. So, in other words, there is a scientific basis for monogamy and polygamy. Now, let's say you get it on and you have a baby, and it's all about the sperm and the egg. There's a whole chapter on that. This next chapter of the book is, how do you raise a child, right? What's the best thing to do to raise children? Now, every parent, from the moment a woman knows she's conceived, and hopefully the man who's the father, they worry. Should I play Mozart over the belly? When the baby's born, should I, make sure they floss them when they're 3 years of age? The bookshelves are groaning with books about how to raise children, and it's very controversial. This single test is a great one in terms of how you raise children. It's the best one that psychologists have done. It's called the famous marshmallow test, right? Now, this was done in the 70s, a guy called Meechan in Stanford. And what he did was this. He got some 8 and 9-year-olds, and he gave them a marshmallow, and he said, if you don't eat that marshmallow, don't touch it for 15 minutes, I'll give you a second one. Left the room. Imagine the consternation in the child. And then they filmed these children, and the kids who managed to wait 15 minutes, okay, they could distract themselves, they put their fingers in their ear, they put their heads under the table. Those kids, 15, 20 years later, right, had 20% more income, more successful relationships. All the metrics of success, if you will, was higher in the child who could distract themselves. The ones who stuck it immediately in their mouth, they did less well in their subsequent lives, right? And this has been replicated across different cultures and societies. What was going on here? It's called metacognition. And again, the psychologists will know about this. The child who can distract themselves and think about thinking, it's called, of course, is able to use that trait in many aspects of life, and then they become successful later on. And that seems to be a predictor. Now, why some kids do it and some don't is still a mystery. It was controversial, this study. Sometimes the kid was hungry. Honestly, because he was from a bad socioeconomic group, that could be the reason, you see. So be careful how you interpret psychology experiments. And I told this story, a little anecdote, we're going to be here all night. Another anecdote for you. I was on another TV show, I think it was on Daithí's one, that one. These are rubbish, these afternoon shows. No, I love you, Daithí. Anyway, they asked me this, and I reminisced. I said, well, when I was 11, this is true, I remember vividly, it was a May summer's evening. I'm playing football outside my house on the road, with my mates, 11-year-old. And I knew I had to go and study. So I went in to study and left them playing football. I had the metacognition skill. I want to play football, but I'm a SWAT, so I'm going to go in. And I went in and studied, right? Now, I told that on live on the television. That night I got a text off one of my old mates who was actually there. He said, Luke, you were shite at football. That's why you... So you got to be careful what you say about it. But there is this idea of metacognition as a predictor, and I love that experiment. It really does tell us a lot. Christmas, in many ways, is a sly exercise in metacognition. Wait, you know. Parents, if you teach your kids to wait and control these things, then they might do well in life, is the idea there. And then we move on, having done the business of how to raise a kid, the gender topic. There's a whole chapter on that. Now, you may never have seen this. What was good about the book was they put a picture. That's the X chromosome, that big one, and that's the Y chromosome. Okay, that's the chromosome that determines maleness. If you carry the Y chromosome, you're male. If you carry 2 X's, you're female, and that determines gender. It's not as simple, as you all know. Even though that was the way we thought it was, Facebook, about 3 years ago, had 72 options in gender. Can you believe it? And man and woman were just 2 of them. I think man was number 33 and woman was number... Because people's subjective view of gender is different. So gender is a very complicated thing. It's not just about an X and Y chromosome. But still, general purposes, the Y chromosome means you're going to be male. And there's the hormone. It's a science book. There's testosterone. That stuff determines maleness. You know, all the traits of male. You know, your voice breaks at teenage years and all that sort of stuff. That's driven by that hormone. Now, very interestingly then in the book, I do talk about transgender because it's very hard to pin it down what gender is in a way. And in Asia especially, there's an awful lot of men are less masculine, shall we say, less body hair. Their voices are a bit higher. That Asian people are like that. And many, there's a big sort of number of Asian men change sex and become transgender. And in Thailand, they organised a beauty contest. Every person in this picture was a man who had a sex change and became a woman. It's called the Miss Tiffany Universe Beauty Contest, and it was invented to support transgender people. It's a big celebration. It's probably the last vestige of a beauty contest we're going to have. Isn't that ironic? We'll be men who became women. There's even a bikini round, I'm not joking you. So it's the last vestige of beauty contests will be this transgender beauty contest. And then I talk about some women have lots of testosterone naturally. You know, that's Caster Semenya, you may have heard of her. She won Olympic medals and they tested her, trying to ban her, which was stupid. She's naturally making more testosterone. It's like banning Michael Phelps because he's got a long leg or whatever, you know. It's a natural thing. So the idea of testosterone and gender, I think, is a very interesting topic. And then I talk about, which people are fascinated by as well. This chapter got huge interest. You know, the basis of being straight or gay. And that's been studied by psychologists and biologists for a long time to explain this trait. And it turns out there's big genetics if you're gay or straight is the first thing. So it's something genetic. One idea there is that having gay people in the community actually helps because their sisters' offspring are supported. They're called gunkles, these gay uncles, for instance. So there may be an evolutionary reason why maybe 10% of men are gay. The big one for me, though, was, the best science behind this was, birth order predicts homosexuality. And what do I mean? The more sons a mother has, the greater the chance of the son being gay. And it's true, it's been proven across all these cultures. What's happening is we think that the male fetus is kind of being rejected by the woman's body, and testosterone probably is being regulated during development, okay? And with every baby, she's sensitized, so this might go up. That's one possible explanation. And then I talk in the book about that famous Irish thing of the 7th son of a 7th son. He must be fabulous, because the prediction there is massive, you know. So birth order seems to be a predictor of that specific trait, which is great. And then I get into it then, you know, what's really important about the human species is diversity, remember. We must have diversity. The one thing Darwin taught us is, without diversity, we die. Every species, the more diverse, and it can be transgender, it can be gay, straight. Diversity is great for us as a species, which is fantastic, you know. And then I talk about these other traits, and music is a big trait for humans. We all love music, hopefully. And again, this has been studied a lot. This is the brain on music in an MRI scanner. That pinky bit is called the vesiculus, lights up when you listen to music that you love. You know, if you're tone deaf, and a certain percent of people are tone deaf, this part doesn't light up. So we know music is sort of a real physical thing in the brain. The second thing about music is it's wonderfully beneficial. You wonder, why would we have music, you know? And we have 50,000 years ago, we made a flute out of a mammoth bone, so it's a very ancient trait. And it looks like a big function of music is social bonding as a community. When you sing in a choir, it's massively beneficial. Many studies have shown this. People in choirs are healthier. It's social. You're concentrating. It's fantastic. You know, so music seems to be tied in to us as a social species. And one other part I talk about is, why are some notes dissonant? You know, why do some notes jar in our brains? You know, in medieval times, a dissonant chord was called the devil's interval. It was used to signify evil. You know, it turns out that's learned. We learn that, you know, we don't like that tone, we like this one instead. That's a learned trait. The evidence was amazing. They found a tribe in the Amazon called the Chimane tribe who prefer dissonance over consonance, you know, and they much prefer music that's jarring. So it must be learned. It can't really be, you know, hardwired, I guess, is the way thing. And the science of music to me is a big fascination. And then this bit is good, the beneficial effects of music. You know, do you ever study with music on in the background? We all have done that. Is that good or not? And there was a great study showing if you learn a language with music in the background, not loud music now, just a bit of music in the background, you learn 10% more words per hour than without music in the background. So music is somehow affecting our brains. And one very serious part was many surgeons put music on in the operating theatre, and they've done a really systematic study. Is that a good or a bad thing? And guess what it is? It's a very good thing. The outcome is often better if there's music in the background. That begs the question, what song would you play? Staying Alive would be a good one, all right? Do not play Another One Bites the Dust. That's goes there. And then the last bit while I'm at it is they use music as a form of torture. Get this. In Canada, on teenagers to torment them if they've committed a crime, they play Barney at them for hours. They tried to play Justin Bieber, but that defied the Geneva Convention, they decided. So they stuck with Barney as a way to torment the kids. But music, all these beneficial effects of music is wonderful. And then I've got a whole chapter on humour. We laugh a lot as a species, as you know. Now, many species laugh, but we're very good at laughing. And a massive study was a great one. They filmed a shopping centre and looked at people laughing, right? 80% of laughter is social. It's not about jokes. So it looks like humour and laughter is about social bonding as well. Now, we like jokes, and there's all these different jokes, and the science of jokes has been studied. We love jokes that poke fun at authority, say, again, that's a bonding thing, you know. We love absurd jokes that make us laugh. So we love humour. And in fact, the oldest joke ever, this is corpsing, by the way, you know, he's not the Messiah. Corpsing is quite a, I might start to corpse now, I've realised that. So corpsing is humans. But the thing is, what makes something funny, you know? And the oldest joke ever, get what the oldest joke ever is. It's on a hieroglyph in ancient Egypt. Now, it won't be funny for you, because those Egyptians had different sense of humour. But the joke was, a newlywed groom never farts on his wedding night. Okay. Jane found that. Thank God someone did. Now, that is, we like toilet humour, don't we? You know, even the Egyptians like toilet humour. That was a good example of a joke. And then the last part of that chapter is going to say, amazingly, someone funded a study, which animals laugh when you tickle them. I suspect Science Foundation Ireland didn't fund that project, did they? And guess what laughs? Not many laugh. Rats laugh when you tickle them. Isn't that the strangest thing ever? You know, and in that part I say, look, his next, whoever this guy was, his next project will be how to talk to animals, and if you can talk like Dr. Dolittle, would you make an animal laugh? And I came up with an original joke. Are you ready for my original joke? Now make sure you laugh at this one. My joke is, this is to an animal, right? If you're being chased by a taxidermist, never play dead. Yeah, that's my. But there we have it, laughter and tickling. Now, then we move on to and there's a role of drums, religion, you see, and the science of religious faith. Again, a very important part of being human. Half of the Earth's population have devout faith. There's something about religion in the human condition. If you're a scientist, it's a very simple thing. It's an evolved trait. We invented God, not the other way around. The reason is because it's good for you. If you believe in God, you go to Mass, you socialise, that's good for your health. If there were genes for that, they would persist. So religious faith, as a scientist, you'd say, is an evolved trait. And the best evidence, in my view, is this. Here's our famous Book of Kells. Those monks were high as kites on psilocybin. That's a psychedelic, it's classic the most famous work of art, isn't it? That's a disembodied head. It's a classic psychedelic image, you see. And there are hints that the monks were taking magic mushrooms as part of their religious ceremony. And many cultures took psilocybin, the Native American, or the peyote cactus, you know. And people see visions, you know. And in fact, this guy, Al Hoffman, he makes LSD by mistake in a lab one day in Sandoz. He synthesizes LSD, has the first trip. He was absolutely converted to religious faith after that trip. And many people who take acid have a religious experience. Again, that suggests the brain, you know, and it's getting rewired in some way. So the scientific explanation for faith is probably to do with brain activity, and it's a social thing, is the way to think of it. And then I begin to move into, you know, other areas. Sleeping is a big part of being human. There's sleeping beauty. There's brain waves. Now, this is very sobering for you all. You are all machines, there's no question. This is the circadian rhythm. We all have a 24-hour cycle. The most dramatic thing is when you fall asleep at about like 9 p.m. or 10 in the evening, melatonin rises, and that makes you fall asleep. You know, all through the 24-hour cycle, you peak at different times for different things. Muscle strength is best in the afternoon, for instance, you know. So we are little machines turning, you know. And our behavior as human beings, then, is governed by this circadian cycle set tens of thousands of years ago, this rhythm of life, I suppose, and that's what we're built of in that way. And then the big question has been, why do we sleep at all? It seems like a very strange thing to do. You're very vulnerable if you fall asleep. You could be attacked, you know, whatever. Very important. If you keep an animal alive, awake, it'll die within about a week. So sleep is essential for health. And the question is, what's it doing? 2 years ago, they make a big discovery. When you fall asleep, little vessels in your brain open up and you flush out the toxins, amazingly. During the day, your brain is buzzing. You build up byproducts that are toxins. You flush them out at night down to your liver. It's like when you go to bed, you put the washing machine on. It's very similar. You're washing your brain at night. And of course, this is one reason why Maggie Thatcher may have got Alzheimer's. There's a big link between not sleeping enough and Alzheimer's. You know, the brain isn't being washed enough when you sleep. So sleep is a very important function to be human. You must fall asleep at night. And then we begin to get towards Extinction in the book. Get ready. Don't be too depressed now. The next book's aging, and we all have to get old. Isn't it shocking? You know. And why do we age? I talk about that. This creature lives for 1,400 years. It's called Hydra. Now, why does that live for? We don't know. You know, it's amazing. At the bottom of the ocean, this thing lives. So it's a bit of a mystery why we age. And in fact, this worm is a nematode. It's microscopic. A group in the US changed 4 genes in that nematode, and it lived 4 times the length of a normal nematode. Imagine if we changed those 4 genes in humans, and we live to be 4 times as long. So it's very genetic. We think it's tied into nutrition. Those genes were involved in nutrient metabolism and so on. So it's something to do with nutrition. We think when we eat, we make a byproduct. It's called reactive oxygen, and that might cause the aging process to happen, and you can't get away with not eating, can you? So it seems to be tied into nutrition. And then I love this one. This is the oldest person on record, 122 years, Jean Calment, although there's controversy about her. See this? Her daughter pretended to be her, apparently. For the moment, let's keep it that she's the oldest person ever. Smoked every day of her life. Isn't that fantastic? And then this is brilliant. This is Accaroli. This town in Italy, loads of people live to be 90 plus, okay? And they wonder why. Now, scientists have gone in there and tortured those people to death to study them. You take blood and what is it about these people? And then you've got, this is a great study, 3 parts of the world, Japan, Italy, and in the US. These are all called blue zones, where people live over 100, and the traits they all share. And the big trait actually is nutrition, definitely. Eat sparingly. Certain foodstuffs, legumes, are very good for you, you know, in your diet. One that was great here was the empowered women. See that? That was a feature between the Japanese and the Italian sites, for instance. And these studies are very informative. How do we live to a ripe old age? It can be lifestyle, it can be food, all that kind of thing. And I love this one as well. A study on happiness. There's a great topic for are you human or not? And this has been reproduced across several studies. You're happiest in your early 20s. And then it goes down and down and down. And it bottoms out at my age in your early 50s. And then goes back up again. Now, this is a very strange thing. It doesn't matter if you're married or single or gay or straight. All those traits are, it's just a human thing. Your brain is changing naturally. And eventually you realize, to hell with this, I'm not going to bother, I'll be happy, you know. So if you're miserable, wait, because you'll come out the other end of it, is the trick here. Now, finally, and time will be running out shortly. Finally, where are we going? That's the 3rd question. Okay, so where do we come from? I'll recap for you, will I? There'll be a multiple choice questionnaire as you're leaving. Where do we come from? 4.2 billion years ago, evolution, us. That's it. Secondly, what are we? All that wonderful stuff that makes us human, isn't it great? Where are we going? Many answers to this one. New medicines, my area, very impressed. Alexander Fleming. You know, there's no question, medical research. Here's a woman people haven't heard of, Gertrude Elion. won the Nobel Prize for Medicine back in 1987. She discovered new medicines for gout, malaria, and herpes, you know. So we're seeing more and more medical advances, all these new medicines down the track. There's no doubt we're all optimistic, and this have a big effect on the human species. No more Alzheimer's, imagine. No more Parkinson's, no more cancer. This is the real vista that we're now looking at. Fantastic. Gene therapy, cell therapy. Stem cells are a really great area. You can grow organs in a dish now. Last year they grew a heart in a dish, a beating heart from a cell. Can you believe it? You know, incredible. So the future is fantastic, at least if people can afford it. There's another ethical question. But certainly the future of medicine is fantastic. But never forget what one of our great graduates, Jane, as well, who Jane loves. Jonathan Swift said the best doctors in the world are Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Merryman. Isn't that nice? He knew what he was talking about. You know, those are the key traits. And then, you know, neuroscience is huge, obviously. What's the mind? Are we just neurotransmitters? There's anxiety. There's depression. You know, these go up. There's love. They all go up together, you know. And the mind, and at the Schrodinger conference, that was a big focus, the mind. And what is the mind? That's a big area. There's happiness with serotonin, so it's interesting. And then there's no doubt AI, robotics. We all keep hearing about this the whole time. That will have a massive effect on us as a species. Driverless cars, in Phoenix in December, the city centre is just for driverless cars now. They're coming, you know, imagine the effect this is going to have. No more parking needed, you know, anybody can get access to places, older people can get out, you know, the pubs in Ireland will thrive because you can get a lift home. Robots are going to be everywhere, and then finally we will die. That's where we're going, right? And I talk about death. I said in that chapter, get your smartphone out, you can scroll down, you'll pass a date you're going to die on. The Grim Reaper hasn't filled it in yet. That's all that's happened there, you know. So we're all going to die unless we have cryonics to preserve us. There's a possibility, I guess. And then extinction. The last chapter is we will definitely become extinct as a species because everything becomes extinct eventually. You know, the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Look at this guy, the great Irish Elk. 10,000 years ago, they were roaming around Ireland. Because what's great is they're a misnomer. They're not Irish, they're not great, and they aren't an elk. So it's the best misnomer ever. They got wiped out. You know, this thing happened. 70% of life on Earth became extinct at the Ordovician event by a massive gamma ray hit the Earth, you know, and the atmosphere got stripped away. So extinction is coming towards us. Now, the publisher then said to me, Luke, you can't finish on that. It's too depressing. You've got to be more positive. So the last chapter is things are getting better. And this is my last point in many ways. The great thing about science is, if we're lucky, it improves things for humanity. That's why we do science as well. Apart from answering, you know, discovery and all that sort of stuff, it benefits humanity. And the evidence is really good for this, even though there are pockets of awfulness. You know, in 1916, 1 in 2 babies died in Dublin, right? Isn't that horrendous? The mother could expect 1 in 2 of her children to die. That's gone to almost 0. There's literacy. All these great advances because of science. The Large Hadron Collider, great cooperation between scientists looking for fundamental particles there. Great example, you know. The International Space... Here's a good one, look at that. This is for you. You know, he came round about a year ago. And that was, crikey, that looks as complicated as Brexit. There's John Bolton, one of our great machines. So, apart from Brexit, everything's going great. And then the International Space Station, great collaboration there. And finally, this. So, education is so important. There's no question about this at all. The reason for all these advances, the reason why science has helped in so many ways is because of education. Without education, there's no scientists, there's no engineers, there's no doctors. That's the first thing. Secondly, education liberates people and lets them lead as full a life as possible. And I talk about this woman, Manali Yousafzai. You heard her, she's fantastic. She defied the Taliban. And women's education in particular, of course, in India, incredible. You know, I think something like 20 years ago, 90% of women left education at 12, now it's 18. So they have a massive effect, education. So teachers are extremely important. And now, finally, you'll be relieved. During the old book publicity, I was on Keelan Shanley's radio show on RT1. And she asked me, why did you do biology? And I said, well, I had a great teacher in secondary school. I'm from Bray, and I went to Pres Bray. And I said, a man called Fran Mooney was our hero. And he was. He came in, he was 26 years of age, it was 1979. He had long hair down to here. He torn jeans. In those days, you said a prayer before every class. Remember that? He said, forget that shit. He said to me, remember one day in class, he said, Padraig Pearse is a paedophile. He said, that's shocking. But he's a very radical guy. We called him Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. He looked like Shaggy. He groovy guy. He taught me biology, and I mentioned him. Now, 2 weeks later, I got a letter from him, okay? And it says, Dear Luke, he's retired. He lives in France. He's 68 now. I live in France. He says, my daughter is still living in Dublin. Heard you on the radio. Thanks very much for mentioning me. And he said, I might come to one of your lectures. Now, a month later, I gave a lecture on the book in Smock Alley. And I'm in this part of the lecture, and I said, now, and I told the story. I said, is there any chance Mr. Mooney is here? He goes, sir. He was in the third row. Right? Puts his hand up, sir. I said, well, Fran, what can I say? It's a massive round of applause for Fran. He was great, you know, and he's sitting, he's a lovely fella, very meek. And then he says, thanks very much. And then afterwards, he comes up to me, and there we are. There's me and Shaggy. And it was great, this. He puts his hand, I put my hand out, and he grabbed me. He hugged me for like 10 seconds, like really held me close, you know, and I'm going, this is a bit strange. And then the great thing, we parted, he said, I don't remember you. He says, so, thanks very much, Shaggy. But wasn't this the one? That's a great story because the teachers, and we all have the same story. I bet everyone here, hopefully, oh, that was a great teacher. And there's no question education is what it's all about. And that makes things great. And, you know, come and join us on this adventure. I then say in the last page of the book, you know, science is about improving things. We're boldly going where no one has gone before. The reason why I became a scientist was I wanted to see something for the first time. You know, imagine that moment when you see something nobody's seen before. It's fantastic. And remember, a lot more discovery is needed. You know, this is the stuff we know. We've no freaking idea the rest of it. You know, so it's a great thing to do because it's a grand adventure. And if we follow science and we encourage people to be scientists and doctors and engineers and all the rest of it, we might finally reach the ultimate ambition, which is to live long and prosper. Thanks very much.
That was absolutely fantastic. What a way to start the new academic year. Anyway, we have time for questions. A lot of people in the audience, so there's some, and the acoustics in here are dreadful, so you really need a mic. So put your hands up so we can get a sense of where the questions are coming from. If we have any, I'm sure there'll be. There's one right down here in the front. Any others, just so we can take a couple at the same time? So there's a lady here, just in the second row. If you just pass it along. Any others? All right, why don't you get things going?
My question is probably a very basic one, but the slide with the way that the different species evolved.
Yeah.
And you said that the species, as we know it today, has 2% Neanderthal in it.
Yeah.
Would it be possible that it didn't distill evenly and that some people have a higher percentage?
Absolutely. Yeah, fellas from Kerry. Well,
I have a theory.
I said, fellas from Kerry are 58% Neanderthal. No, that's... it does vary. It does actually vary. There are subpopulations where it's higher. You know, you can imagine like a Neanderthal caveman had sex with a Homo sapiens woman and the child is 50-50, but then that child has sex with Homo sapiens, so it gets diluted out, you know. But some kept having sex, I suppose, and the percent went up even more. I think the highest is about 7%, though, honestly.
That would explain a lot.
It would explain that, wouldn't it? I know, yeah.
This is being live streamed and podcast.
I know.
It's like
And then the Denisovans, it's mainly Asian. They've got more Denisovan DNA, so you do see differences in different populations. But we all carry it, though, so we're all descended from the couplings in a way. You know, so it depends on the amount.
So again, there's two in the middle. So Claire, and then this lady directly in front of you. So if you ask one, Claire, and then pass it forward, and Luke, take both together. That's lovely.
Thank you for the talk. You've said extinction is our future.
Yeah.
Do you think that the way humans are currently using the planet is speeding up that process? And if so, what can we do? What should we be doing?
Absolutely. That's a serious part. No question. I'm a zealot for this as well, by the way. I mean, we're making a mess of it, really. You know, it's terrible. That chapter I talk about, you know, there's always people walking around, the end is nigh and we should be worried, you know. We should just be ashamed because we are destroying life on Earth still, you know. 83% is a lot of animals to become extinct, 50% plants. We've no idea what that's going to mean for us as a species. It has to be damaging, though. One example would be Lyme disease, you know, the tick-borne. That's gone up hugely because of lack of diversity in North America. The species that have died out would have been the host for that. And then they jump into us instead, you know. So one prediction might be infectious diseases might go through the roof, for instance. Secondly, it's a web of life. We all need each other, you know, no more than as humans we need all these other species as well. So the big fear is that this carnage that's going on will eventually spell the end for us. That's a big part of it. The more bigger thing is climate change, of course. I mean, that's really damaging. You know, we're going to wreck the Earth through climate change as well. So again, the only thing we can do is keep saying it, and you know, it's about politicians really to change the policies and so on. And it is happening a bit. But then you've got that moron Trump, you know, backing out of the Paris Agreement. It's awful, you know. So we've got to keep just saying it, I think. And in our own lives, do the best we can, I suppose, to observe, you know, this and make sure that we recycle all those things. But you're right, though, that we're going to hasten our own demise, and we don't care, really. You know, what I find most egregious, and this is some of the commentators, is the poorest people who suffer, remember, not the rich guys who made the mess. Because flooding will happen in Asia, and it'll be horrendous there. And yet, if you're in New York, you just go up Trump Tower, I imagine, and laugh down at them. You know, so it's the people who didn't do the damage will be the ones who will suffer. So I think these are really important questions, you know.
Do you want the lady in the striped top? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. I will continue on that doomy and gloomy topic of our extinction. Is there any possibility of our species to actually evolve? Forward, backward? How do you foresee the future, putting aside the extinction, potential extinction,
Absolutely.
or likely extinction?
Well, evolution is happening all the time. It's just the time scale of evolution is slow, so it's hard to spot, you know. But all evolution is survival of the fittest, you know. So if there are certain pressures on a population, there's variation, you see. That's why variation is so important, by the way, because some will survive, and then they become, you know, they evolve into a different species eventually, you know. So there is a prediction that we will continue to evolve in various ways, you know, and we will change and adapt. So there's a chance, I suppose, it could be tens of thousands, hundreds of years away, a subgroup will survive and everybody else becomes extinct and now we're a new species. That may happen. But it won't be Homo sapiens anymore. We will have gone as a species, you know, it'll be over for us. But that is a possibility.
The gentleman at the back.
Yeah, thanks. Another question very much related to the previous two questions. Is it the case that the very attributes that we can admire of human beings, the wonder, the curiosity, and so on, that also facilitates the other aspects that we don't like and that may inevitably cause our destruction or distinction?
Is it an innate business that we might wreck things anyway? Is that what you're wondering?
That it's almost the capacity is built in for
that's a possibility, but we are intelligent enough. I mean, the thing is, one reason for education, I remember vividly, I was in Oxford about 3 years ago and I had a high table in a college, right? I'm sitting beside this woman who was an expert on pedagogy, which is the science of education. And like from Stanford or somewhere, and I said, why do we go to university? She said, it's to make people reasonable. So one of the reasons for education is to make people reasonable. And then you tell them, you're wrecking the planet, stop, and then they might listen to you, you know. So the worst thing of all is to have unreasonableness in society. So that we have the capacity to understand this and then hopefully act on it. So I'm hoping it isn't, you know, it isn't going to happen in a sense through that, I suppose, is the way to think of it. So in other words, you're intelligent, but you need to be reasonable as well. That combination might save us, would be my view of it.
Any other questions? A gentleman here in the front. Actually, as you come down, just beside Leonard, so come down. Sorry, there's a lot of hands. So there's two, Leonard and the gentleman beside him, and then there's another gentleman here. If Eve, bring the mic over to the middle. Thanks very much. Please go ahead, sir.
First, Luke, I'm one of the 8,000 who's bought the book.
God bless
it's a great
you,
read, so
that's a fiver for me.
You can pay me back later. I've also heard a rumour that Michael Healy-Rae is now trying to pursue autonomous vehicles down the rural hinterland of Kerry.
This is going to save the rural
back
pub.
at home from the pub.
I'll tell you.
I'm wondering, in the midst of rather than extinction, if we think human intelligence, which is the topic we were just on, and you look at AGI from which is getting much hyped. Everything is hyped, of course, as we know. What are your thoughts on the cooperation of humans and machines?
Absolutely.
And more the superiority of humans as life goes on into the 21st century. What are your thoughts?
It's staggering what's happening there. I mean, I'll give you one example. So last year, a robot discovered a piece of scientific knowledge for the first time, right? In other words, they programmed the robot, they fed all the publications into it, it read them, if you like, designed an experiment, got another robot to do it, and they found a new discovery was made. Now, if that continues, the rate of discovery goes up exponentially. and there's no human resource issues because it's just robots doing it, So they're predicting this massive increase in knowledge. That slide was true, that pie chart. There's a lot to be discovered, remember. So if you give a robot the task of inventing some way to drive energy without having to use fossil fuels, maybe they'll crack it, And AI is doing that, and they're learning and all those algorithms. So that's one prediction. And then the driverless cars is by far and away the biggest one that we're looking at the moment. So I think AI will become more, and this is, everybody knows this anyway, but it's true. That's going to accelerate and get more and more elaborate and speed things up in a way, And the second thing is employment, of course. There's all these jobs will go. But whenever technology comes along, jobs are lost when new ones get created, remember. So the predictions aren't quite so severe in terms of employment. In fact, that chapter in the book, they'll free us. Robots are here to free us, not to enslave us, and there's a good optimism about them as well.
Long live the humans.
There was a gentleman in the blue, just here. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do is, you mentioned in your lecture about voles or rats, both of those animals have gone through a period of evolution to get where they are. Yep. Both of animals experience raising young. They experience growing old and dying. They have the same kind of experiences that you've described as we as humans experience. So this is a lecture about what it means to be an animal as much as it means to be human. Are you saying that there is no distinguishing feature between being human and being an animal?
No.
Or is there something that sets us apart from being an animal?
Well, that's the big question. I mean, the more we look at animals, the more we realize how close we are to them. I mean, they're as intelligent as us, many of them, in various... It depends how you measure intelligence, of course, by the way, But we're all the one really big, happy, DNA-based family, and we evolved into different environments. Now, clearly, we have real traits that they don't. We're very inventive and we have all these things going on. But many animals use tools, and crows are a great example. They have very elaborate tool use, So we should never dismiss the intelligence of animals in many ways, because they're built from the same stuff as us, you see. That example is a good one, I've felt, because it's a very complex trait, fidelity, isn't it? You might think. And yet it was a single gene. They managed to use epigenetic modification, in fact, to turn the polygamous vole into a monogamous one by boosting this. It was really clever, and it was a Nature paper. So in other words, a very complex trait in voles could be explained very simply, and why not in humans? For that trait would be similarly explained, I think. So the overlap is clear to me.
Eve, Alva's here, if you just pass it over.
Thanks for the great talk. And I also bought your book.
God bless.
In fact, I got it from my daughter for Christmas.
Right. Buy one for the whole family. You don't get 4 or 5.
Yeah. No, my question is, in the end of the day, is it only hormones and chemistry? Is there nothing else?
No. Well, if I was to inject you with testosterone, you'll begin to find me very attractive, say. Or if I have oxytocin and you have, then we begin to bond. So it's been shown the hormones have these dramatic effects. That's the first thing. But there's a great study, and it can't just be that, And one example was they got women. The Swedes always do these studies for some strange reason. In Sweden, they showed women pictures of men, like maybe 1,000 men, and say, which one do you find attractive and which don't you? Just by visual things. And they rated them, okay? 6 months later, they showed the same pictures, and they labeled some of the men as kind. This sounds a bit stupid, the word kind. And they were much more likely to be rated as attractive, even though the pictures hadn't changed. So there's something else going on there. It can't just be physical, It's personality, it's all that sort of stuff as well, So it's a bit trickier than just something very mechanical, if you like, And then remember, diversity again, as I said already, is the key to this. There is actually someone for everyone. Like some women hate a man with 10 to 9, and some women, hate the other way, whatever it might be. So, so there is someone for everyone, I think ultimately. So it can't just be this. But yet these hormones have a massive effect, there's no question. And the best one was dopamine in that study on when you're in love. The same part of the brain lights up on heroin. That means you're activating a pathway there that makes you obsessively addicted to the person you're attracted to. It's just dopamine levels, you see. So we know there is a chemical basis for a lot of this.
But is personality just chemicals?
Well, that's a very complicated question, yeah. And again, diversity, everybody here has a different personality. I was amazed by psychologists group us, we're all slightly different. Ultimately, it would be chemically based, but how do you get the personality? That's environmental. How your upbringing drives personality, but it's a mix of the two. The big debate always is it nature or nurture? And the answer always is it's nature via nurture. So you reveal your genes through how you're being brought up in a way, you know, and that seems to be the key feature of all. They're very complicated things. What's stupid is the notion of a gene for something. That's gone out the window now. That was always a stupid. They're far too complex to be down to certain genes, including homosexuality, by the way. There was a thought that was a genetic thing, and there is genes in there, but it can't just be that. There's a lot more going on, you know.
So you blame the parents?
Always blame the parents as a rule of thumb.
Thanks, Alva. Please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, this was beautiful, but it kind of is similar to what they asked. Before everything goes up in smoke, do you think we'll truly understand the idea of consciousness and like terms like aura? Like, do we really understand it more than just brain chemistry?
The question's so much better than the 6 o'clock show, I'll tell you that much. Well, now, consciousness, we can't get it. I'm not a neuroscientist, and Ian Robertson, the psychologists study this in great depth, you know. Although I'm interested, we're all interested in this, aren't we, in a sense, you know. The mind is the big, in fact, the central question in biology now is what's the mind? We've no idea what memory is, the basis for memory, you know, our consciousness. We have no clue about the mechanistic molecular basis. That question is like what the gene question was in 1943 when Schrödinger gave his lecture. No idea what a gene was, and then DNA gets discovered. We're waiting for neuroscientists to discover something, to explain memory or learning and how consciousness works in a way. But what I like is the drug thing, like I give it LSD, you become religious. Isn't that fascinating? It's a tiny chemical, you know. So there are chemical things going on there about the mind and the brain. We just don't fully understand them. Like, will we get there? There's massive research going on to try to understand the brain and the mind. That has been for years. Because the motivation for much of that is like Alzheimer's, to slow that down and try to understand the mind. So a lot of drug companies are hopefully investing in this as well to get answer to these questions.
There's a question up at the back, and then we'll come, there was another one here. We'll try and take a couple more, but we are starting to run out of time. Please go ahead.
I wondered what you think about what it means to be superhuman, and with all that happening in genetically modified humans and picking this trait and picking that, what are the implications of that? Are we going to have a dual race? Are we going to have an extinction of one type and a proliferation? And what does that mean for equality?
Yeah, there's a chapter in the book on that. I'm glad you asked me that, because that's one of the chapters. Could we invent a Cucullin I talk about there, a Spider-Man? And there's no question now in mice you can do it. You can make a super mouse that's got 3 times the muscle strength of a normal mouse by altering certain proteins through genetic modification of their muscle tissue. You know, imagine that in humans to make us 3 times stronger. What would that mean? You know. Now, the ethics, of course, you can't do this on humans, for obvious reasons, you see. One criticism of research into intelligence is if it was genetic, then we could be in big trouble, couldn't we? Because we could screen out the people who haven't got the genes, or maybe boost it in others, you know. So these are very important ethical questions that are coming out. They've got much more sharp lately because of CRISPR, the technology that allows you to change genes on demand, you know. And that's going to speed up this hugely. And the Chinese, did you see this? There were 2 babies born with CRISPR-modified genes. It's horrendous. I mean, and there was outcry against that. So it's very tricky, isn't it, in a sense? And it's a big ethical thing, I think. And there's no doubt certain traits will be genetic. It mightn't be personality or musical ability. They're too complex, probably, but other ones will have a genetic basis. And you could conceive of making humans with these extra traits for definite, you know, and that's a big concern. So it's one for the ethicists to keep an eye on, I think.
Tell me, those super mice, are they ever female?
They are, of course they're female.
I thought they...
well, now, I've got a great one for you.
Actually, I shouldn't have asked that.
Sorry. So there's a study in mice. You won't believe this study, because I think it's fantastic. They found a gene for the lesbian trait in mice. I'm not joking you, right? Right. They knocked out a gene called FUC. It's fucosyl transferase, and it was FUCM. They knocked out a mice, and the mice became same-sex females. The males were still heterosexual. All the female mice became... if the word is lesbian about mice, I'm not sure, but anyway, that's what they... And it's the FUCM gene. I said, disappointingly, it wasn't the gene. Fuck. They could have got as far as K, but they didn't. But that just shows you there's a very complex trait, you know, in female mice, which is incredible. You know.
I think last question, there's a gentleman at the back, yes. I'm sorry, have we got the mic here somewhere as well? Okay, we'll take this one and yours, and then that'll be it. So please go ahead, sir, and then we'll come to you. Please.
My question is actually about your expertise in inflammation.
Yes, thank God.
I've got 2 friends who are identical twins, and they're now in their 50s, and they've evolved different immune systems. Is that a widely areaed study?
Absolutely, yes. Normally identical twins, they're identical obviously genetically, you know, and if one twin gets rheumatoid, the other one usually does, because those autoimmune genes have a big genetic component, there's no doubt, you know. But more complex inflammatories, the environmental bit can be important as well. And again, it'll be the environment and the genes combined. And maybe one twin was exposed to a virus early in their childhood, the other one wasn't, you know, and then that accelerates things, you see. So the environmental bit is being revealed in those twins. But we study twins all the time, and all these studies on intelligence were done with identical twins, and, you know, so they're a very important resource for the genetic basis for something. That's how we know the gay trait is genetic, because if there's identical twins, it's very likely if one is, the other will be as well. Fraternal ones won't, and they use fraternal twins as the control, because they're born at the same time as well, but they don't share the genes, you know, so that's often used in these studies.
Last question.
Yeah. So you were talking about how there was a robot that started doing experiments. And
yeah, they're called graduate students, Hannah,
yeah.
normally.
So I'm just wondering, would like the progression that we've made in like the field of AI, could that lead to our extinction in a way? Like, could it reverse?
Will the robots take over the world?
No, like, would people stop wanting to be educated in a way? You were saying you were talking to somebody that was an expert in education, and she was saying that we need to be educated to keep our survival in a way.
It may happen that it'll all be about the humanities, in fact, and Jane would agree with this in a sense, because it could turn into a world where the humanities count even more, because science is great, but it can be a bit systematic, remember, and robots could do it, you know, at least learn all the literature and design things. Yeah. But to write a piece of music or to do some art or whatever, that may be, you know, more prominent, shall we say, as we go into this age. The great robot story is, and this is of the robotics people talk about this the whole time, if you programmed a robot to make paper clips, say, there's a risk it'll take over the entire world and kill all the humans because they're getting in the way of the paper clip being made. And all the Earth's resources are now used to make paper clips. This is all science fiction, you know. But robotics will have all these interesting consequences, I think, down the line that we can't predict.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a really nice question to end on. So, because I can't even bear the thought of paper clips. Anyway, a couple of plugs before we thank Luke. Obviously, our next speaker, as you've heard, is Ian Robertson, who has just retired as Professor of Psychology here in Trinity. But he's leading a massive global brain health initiative. Again, you'll have heard him on the radio. He's going to be talking about the era of the mind. And that's on the 27th of February. Details, the registration is now open. Obviously, please go online and sign up for that. The other thing I want to give a plug to, and it came up in the context of the questions tonight, is we're doing a Behind the Headlines on climate change. And that's on the 13th of February. We're asking, can stories save the world? So we've got a cracking lineup for that Behind the Headlines. That's on the 13th of Feb. Again, please do sign up. Just a few thank yous. As always, to thank the Trinity Long Room Hub team who put so much effort into making these events run so smoothly. So grateful to you all for coming out on such a, I was going to say a wicked evening, but it's been a magical evening, a very special evening. And your questions have been fabulous. But your questions, of course, have been in response to an absolutely phenomenal performance by Luke. Again, I'm sure you're going to rush off and buy the book if you haven't already done so. But we are extremely lucky, Luke, to have colleagues like you in Trinity, and thank you so much for just that cracking performance tonight. So thank you all, and safe home, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.